Powered by Rep Media in partnership with TSN, it is season 6 of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast, presented by our title sponsor, Tim Hortons. The iconic duo is more iconic. Get a classic donut for $1 when you order any size original or dark roast coffee. Then you choose from an apple fritter, a Boston cream, a honey cruller, the old-fashioned plain, chocolate dip, vanilla dip is there if you want. It's a classic way to enjoy your coffee post Four Nations Face-Off Championship Final. And Ray, it makes sense in our Tim Hortons headlines that we really begin at the end, where Connor McDavid scores the overtime winner. Otherwise quiet night, I would say, by Connor's standard, right? But no different maybe than the golden goal of Sidney Crosby back in 2010 in Vancouver. Doesn't it seem, in terms of the spectacle of the event, almost fitting that it's McDavid that wins it for Canada?
There's a poetry sometimes to sports for all the things that we like to complain about or nitpick or pull apart. Sometimes things are just the way they should be. And in our country, Sidney Crosby's legacy was cemented that afternoon in Vancouver. The puck goes in the net. None of us will forget where we were. I mean, it was that monumental an event, and Sid's place in Canadian lore was cemented. Now, I don't think this tournament is the same, right? It's not the same. But the fact that Connor scored this goal at a time where Sid's now 37 years old, and, you know, the next generation of super players are coming along, the fact that it's McDavid that scored seemed just poetic. It seemed perfect. It's 87, now it's 97. And moving forward, you know, Sid's not getting younger, right? Next year at the Olympics, he's not younger. And we're in the peak years of where McDavid's going to be at his best, right? We saw it the last couple of years, but he's in this peak 5, 6, 7 year period. And this is his time. And when the puck went around the boards and Marner makes a really nice play to grab it and catch it. Yeah. Like, it just seems like you can't believe he could be that open, but that's hockey. Like, you know, Matthews made a decision in a half a second, and I bet you a quarter of a second later he realized he made the wrong one. And you're like, oh boy. Right? And then it's over. I mean, it was just really it was really a pretty amazing overtime for lots of reasons, and ending like it did for Canada's view was about perfect.
So another top story, of course, the play of Jordan Binnington in the championship final, which I want to get to momentarily, but you bring up Mitch Marner. Pretty quiet tournament. He didn't click with Connor McDavid early. Full credit where credit is due. If he doesn't score the overtime winner against the Swedes, Canada isn't there, right? Versus the Americans. So he does deserve credit for that. But he brought his best, didn't he? And in this game, you could see early that he was feeling it, right? Just the way he was handling the puck, the way he was making plays that we're accustomed to seeing him make in the National Hockey League on a nightly basis with the Maple Leafs. But will this help change the narrative on him moving towards the playoffs, or now he has to find a way, as does Austin Matthews, to get it done and to lead that team deeper into the playoffs?
I don't think the last 30 minutes of that game changes the impression of Marner. But what I think it can do is in that game, like Dregs, I don't mean to overestimate the skill and the speed of the game, but it offensively and defensively was amazing, and there is no time to do anything. Mitch's game is patience, hanging on to it, tricky stuff with the puck. There is no time for that. So while I said I don't think that 30 minutes when he got moved to McDavid's line, right? Because he got moved off the Cirelli-Haga line. They flipped him and Stone. When he played that 30 minutes, it looked to me like the like the balls all clicked into place of this is how you have to play. Like whether you want to or not, this is how you
Yeah.
have to play at that level. So I think that can be a real learning thing for him. His coaches, no matter who his coach is, they always talk about Marner's IQ for the game, right? The way that he plays.
Yep, for
Part
sure.
of IQ is learning. And you don't have time for drop passes and tricky little plays that he can get away with in the NHL because it's not this level. So maybe he takes this and takes it with him back to Toronto, because the last half of the game, like, he was put in that spot for a reason. Like, he was one of the better players. He picks up a couple assists, right? And like I said, the play he made on the goal, because he's in the right place, his skill allows him to take over. It was a really interesting tournament because, he had that big moment and then nothing for 2.5 games. And then he was great at the end of it.
All right, so much second guessing as I teased on Canada's goaltending, right? I mean, in a tournament where we wondered at times, maybe after the American game, whether or not John Cooper would make the switch and go to Adin Hill. But as I'm watching him play last night, and I mean, he's just one of those goalies that is willing to take it in the teeth, do whatever is necessary to keep that puck from crossing the goal line. So as it all comes to fruition, he makes save after save, perhaps none bigger than the save he made on Austin Matthews, right? Around 3 minutes into overtime. Yeah. I'm thinking about what John Cooper said just pre-tournament, where he said the fire in his belly. And John Cooper has witnessed firsthand the intestinal fortitude required of each individual player to gut it out, to find a way to win at the highest level, the Stanley Cup. Right. So he must have saw something similarly in Jordan Binnington that was ultimately proven by the way Binnington played, stared down Connor Hellebuck, and I think should silence the critics.
Well, I said on our broadcast, there's a lot of people in Canada that owe Jordan Binnington an apology and owe him a pat on the back, because McDavid's goal doesn't happen without 3 stops by Binnington on Matthews in overtime. Like 3 of them. Before the tournament, we had Darren Pang on, and Panger was talking about Binnington. He knows him quite well from St. Louis. And if you remember, Panger talked about the way that he's wired, that something comes at him and it doesn't always work out, but he's going to face it head on. And the story on Binnington has always been, he'll give up one you don't like, but man, he makes some critical saves. And that's turned out to be the way that the tournament went for him. So the American game, like, I'm still quite surprised that people are all over him about the Larkin goal, right? Like the game winner. It's a great shot. Sometimes you stop it, sometimes you don't. He didn't stop it there. The Gensel goal sucked. He made 3 or 4 great saves to keep the game 2-1. And then you lose 2-1, and because it's a talking point coming in with momentum, that's all that a lot of people could focus on it, instead of, well, Canada did score 1 goal. So even if he stops the Gensel goal, like, what are you saying? It should be 1-0. There's a reason goalies have 3 shutouts in a season. It's really hard, right? Like, so when it got midway through the tournament, I'm like, Cooper's not going to Adin Hill here. That's not happening.
No. Yeah.
And when we talk about the coaches and their decisions, like, those are 2 of the best, right? Mike Sullivan and John Cooper. And they were manipulating their lineups and moving players around. And they're in a 4-game tournament. Those guys had to make 20 critical decisions. And you got to stick to your guns. Like, do you think Cooper's back behind the bench and not feeling the weight of those decisions? Of course he is. Of course he is. And Binnington, he was amazing last night. Remember the first 5 minutes of the game? Canada never touched the puck. And then and Binnington made 2 or 3 really good stops. And you always think, oh, now the goalie settled in. But I think most people were waiting for, ooh, is there going to be a softie? There just wasn't. He played Hellebuck to a standstill, which is really all that Canada could ask, right? Like, just
Agreed.
don't get beat, and he didn't.
Mm.
And he actually was a critical part of Canada's win. I mean, that was obvious to see.
So when the Four Nations face-off concept was first introduced, I think automatically we're all excited. This is best on best available, right? And so from a Canadian perspective, you're thinking, oh, Crosby, McDavid, Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar, all the superstars, right? And the American fan base was thinking the same thing with all the great players over there, likewise with Finland, likewise with Sweden. But I thought it was interesting. Nate MacKinnon was asked prior to the start of the game, during warm-up on ice, whether or not, there was something special that, he thought he was going to be able to do in this one. And I'm paraphrasing the question, but I think his response was, well, I'm going to try my best.
Yeah.
And then there he goes, right? I mean, one of those players named tournament MVP, by the way, that just has a knack. No different than McDavid getting the overtime winner, Sidney Crosby with just arguably one of the most decorated hockey resumes that we're ever going to see. But MacKinnon fits into that conversation, doesn't he?
Yeah, there's certain guys just have it, right? Like, and a lot of times it's undefinable. It's just it. They're like, well, why does the puck come to him there? Why does he do that? Why? I mean, the physical things we can see, but it's just it. And so when he scores the first goal, like when he skates and shoots in motion, not many players can do it like him. Mm-hmm. And so when he comes wheeling around the top of the circle, like, there's not many players that can do it at his speed. McDavid does it. Yep. MacKinnon does it, right? Like, how many more? And, he gets them on the board again. And, I don't know, like, he's playing on that line with Crosby. And I think the romance of the game is like, oh, the two buddies from back home are just going to dominate. Crosby's not healthy. And nobody's going to dominate these players at this level. Like, there's, as great as MacKinnon is, he's not 30% better than half of the game, right? Like, you're just not. Like, the fact that, he scored 4 goals in 4 games, right? Like, that's pretty good. It's not at that level. It's not a bantam tournament, right? Like, it's amazing to watch those guys. And like, I'd go to the other side too. And certain guys can step out at this level and you go, oh my God, they're just different. Right? They're just different. Like, he didn't have a good game in the championship game, I don't think, but Jack Eichel was one for me. I'm like, he's better and better all the time. Yeah. And you're like, these guys the whole game was at another level. There were players in that game yesterday that looked pedestrian. And they go back to the NHL, to the regular league, and they're the best players in the league. Right. But they're in the bottom quarter of this game, and they look like they got snowshoes on. And you're like, man, it's crazy how good this is. Like, it was an amazing spectacle for our sport.
So we'll get into the injury stuff in just a moment, because unfortunately it did have impact on that game. Sure. And it will impact the teams that these players are now going back to in a big way, potentially, and potentially longer term. But first, I love the role that Brad Marchand played for Canada, more off the ice than on. And I'm not suggesting that he wasn't influential on the ice, because he was. But man, he embraced the media. He recognized that he could maybe become not a distraction, a deflection from some of the other guys on the team. You focus on playing. I'll embrace more of the responsibilities off the ice, the media stuff. I'll have some fun, that sort of thing, which I love. So he was asked about, Matthew and Brady Tkachuk post-game after the championship final. And not just the on ice stuff, but the verbal jousting that those guys initiated, right? And he said, quote, sometimes when you shoot your mouth off to the media, it can bite you. And then he went on to say, just for full context, how good these players are, again, how impactful they were for Team USA. And so, he didn't hit him over the head with the Louisville, but he raises a very interesting point, a point that maybe, unless you have the experience of a Brad Marchand or a Sidney Crosby or a player like that, you don't quite get. Like, the swagger is one thing. But you better be careful, right? And I think that was the pretty clear message here, was it not, by Brad Marchand?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I guess it is, except here's the thing. The players are free to evaluate each other all the time, right? Because they get it. Players say things that you wouldn't say.
Yeah.
And that stirs you, right? Like, you're like, who? I can guarantee you the Canadian guys were talking about what the Tkachuks were saying as they're sitting around having pregame meal or meal night after a game. Like, that always happens. You're always talking about it.
Yeah.
The Tkachuks they're big and bold and brash, and that's part of what makes them the players they are. So if you don't like it, you take the good with the bad, I guess, with just about everybody, right? That's just the way it is. When they say it's bulletin board material, though, like when the media writes that, nobody is trying harder because Matthew Tkachuk said something. You're
Right.
already trying hard enough. You're not like, oh, gee, I'm going to try 5% more because he said something I don't like. Like, it doesn't work that way. The guy, when it comes down to it, the guys will go, so-and-so's got a big mouth. I wish he'd shut up. And then they play. Or so-and-so says nothing, and then they play. They don't try harder. You might not like their way.
Yeah.
But then you just play. Like, this is the greatest part of playing. Honestly, Dregs, is the self-evaluation, right? You evaluate yourself. Like McDavid said in his interview last night, I wasn't very good tonight, but I got this one chance. And right, you self-evaluate. And the other thing is, nothing takes away from the fact that the guy you're playing against is for that night or that shift, you have to beat him.
Yeah.
There is nothing in life like it. So people that think they understand that, you don't until 15 shifts a night. You walk nose to nose against the same guy.
Yeah.
And you're like, that frickin' guy is not going to beat me tonight. And that's really that's the whole thing. And it's what makes our sport, but all sport great. It's like instant evaluation. I know I'm good or bad that night. I'm going to beat that guy.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like it. That's why I think guys have problems, have tough times sometimes when they leave the game. Like, what else are you going to do? You're going to compete against somebody in traffic like that, or at the grocery store? Like, it just doesn't work, right?
So injury, as we know, at every level, just creates opportunity, right? And there is this thinking of, well, next man up. Coaches apply that all the time. Well, it's different when you're talking about an international event of this magnitude, when you're asking players to step in the fashion that we saw Jake Sanderson have to do for Team USA with Charlie McAvoy out. Huge loss for the Americans. And then Josh Morrissey can't go in the championship final. He's ill. Prior to that, Cale Makar was sick and had a bit of an injury. Well, Thomas Harley steps in for Team Canada after, he wasn't supposed to join Canada until Boston, but, I'll get to Montreal, gets to Montreal, plays against the Americans last Saturday. So what does that tell you about the player? And does it give us a look into the future for both Jake Sanderson and Thomas Harley as we now think, Ray, to 2026 in the Olympics?
Sometimes these great plans get broken up, and the plans get broken up for lots of reasons. Some of them is injury. And then it's not like there's this grand plan that, oh, Sanderson's going to come in and do this, or Harley's going to come in and play here. That's who you've got. So you throw these young kids into this mix, and both the United States and Canada, by accident, by misfortune and injury, just found two players that are in their mix for the Olympics. Like, if the Ottawa Senators didn't realize what Sanderson could be like at a high level, like, which is what this tournament is, man, he did not look out of place for one shift last night. He made a couple mistakes, and really on the first goal, he got kind of wedged off the puck behind the net by Reinhart and passed to McKinnon, who went around and scored. But so what? That happens 100 times a game. The Ottawa Senators and their fans should be pumped at the way Jake Sanderson played and what he looked like. So he was in Florida, right? He was flying south. They asked him, hey, could you hang on a minute here? Because we're not sure about Quinn Hughes. So he's hanging out in Florida, and they're like, yeah, Quinn has decided he can't play. So instead of flying south, he flew north. And that's how Sanderson got there. And then he was still the seventh guy until McAvoy was injured. And then he does a great job. Harley, man, that picture, I'll never forget that picture of him at practice, standing there looking in the doorways like he was a,
please.
You know, when we're like little kids and you're waiting for the older kids to get off the ice so your session could start. That's what he looked like. And then Makar left so he could come on.
Yeah.
And to play last night, like, there was, Sanderson at least knew he was going to play in the game. Yeah. Harley's just hanging out, and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, Morrissey's sick, you're in. And the first period, he had a couple of bobbles with the puck, like he turned it over a couple times. And then he gets involved, he gets an assist on the MacKinnon goal, and he was in the game. Like, those two guys did a great job. Like, it cannot be understated how hard that was for them and how good they were. Both Canada and the US, by accident, may have found part of their mix for next year's team.
So we're 2 weeks away from the NHL trade deadline, and I'm going to leap over to some trade speculations I may have in just a minute.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right now. I have totally forgotten about the NHL. Somebody said, someone goes, hey, the deadline's a couple weeks away. I'm like, oh yeah, I forget who everybody was looking for before the deadline. Like, totally, you live in this we're in our little bubble. And I'm like, oh yeah, I got a game tomorrow in Pittsburgh. Yeah. I didn't even know who was playing.
Caps Pittsburgh afternoon game.
I thought it was Boston. They're on the other game on ABC. And I'm like, oh, totally forgot. So, like, anyway, go on. So it's like, oh my, so just think, if I'm out to lunch like this, the guys that are in this tournament, like, they've got to shift gears to their teams again. Like, it's going to be hard.
Well, another club executive sent what I'm going to propose to you momentarily, but I do want to put a bow on the Four Nations. Okay. And it is one of the tough takeaways of this event. And, you know, every general manager, coach not involved, certainly owners were worried about the risk of injury going in. And inevitably that's what you have. Sidney Crosby was not healthy coming into the Four Nations face-off. You know, Sid is always good. He looked like he was worn down in the championship final. McAvoy, we've already talked about. Morrissey was sick. Shea Theodore taken out of the event early. And you know, Vegas says week to week. I mean, that could stretch out. You've got the Tkachuks, Brady, Matthew. We watched Brady walk in. Doesn't look good. But he finished the game and played a typical hard Brady Tkachuk hockey game. Matthew wasn't able to finish, right? And we're not going to sit here on the podcast, Ray, and speculate on the seriousness, the specifics of the injury. But, you know, if you're any of these teams, you know, Ottawa is in a playoff battle, right? They need Brady, and hopefully he's good to go. Florida's trying to win the division again, in a battle with the Toronto Maple Leafs. If Matthew Tkachuk is longer term, well, that's a problem. We don't really know entirely what's going on with Alex Pietrangelo. Is he good to go out of the gate here? We know Shea Theodore isn't good to go for an extended period of time. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. It's a byproduct, and the risk of injury that everybody knew was a possibility going in.
Well, okay, so you forgot Boston too. So Boston already doesn't have Hampus Lindholm.
Yes.
And by my understanding, he's not good to go. And so he's not good to go. McAvoy, I mean,
he's going to be a while.
You saw him with his arm in a sling. That's a while. I talked to Shea Theodore on the ice briefly yesterday, and he was just so disappointed, right? And his wrist is in a cast. He's week to week that's the, I mean, I'm no doctor, but when you got your wrist in a cast, you're not coming back next week. No. So, we're looking at longer term stuff. Matthew Tkachuk, I would assume, without getting into it, I got a pretty good idea what's the general problem.
It's going to be a while.
That's going to be a while too. And there's no way to play this event without this risk. And you can see why the owners always have caution getting into this event. Like, it's easy to say, the commissioners said in an interview about the players, the battles they had with the players about playing international hockey. There's really two battles going on. The players want to be protected and reimbursed for their efforts. And the owners on the other side, they want to be somewhat protected. But if you're going to do it, there's no way you get through a tournament with nobody hurt.
No. Yeah.
And, the only team that comes out of this okay and didn't have any worry about it was Washington because they didn't have anybody in the tournament. And so they get back, they're healthy, they're ready to go. And they're a unicorn in this event.
Yeah. Okay. Here's my trade speculation. Okay. Now, we knew, and I lobbed this out there prior to Four Nations, just the idea that Doug Armstrong and the St. Louis Blues was at least having conversation about the possibility of moving Brayden Schenn, not shopping him, but there's some decisions that have to be made around St. Louis. Are we renovating? Sure. Are we retooling? What are we going to do here?
Oh, right? I love all these words, Drake.
The R words are terrific. Yeah. Okay, hold on. Now bear with me here. So,
oh boy.
As we're having this conversation, recording this episode on Friday, I get a text from a club exec, non-related to the St. Louis Blues, saying, what do you think the percentage is that Army parlays this Jordan Binnington success? ? And then he answers the question, 99.9%. And I'm like, ooh, okay. I mean, hey, Jordan Binnington has a modified no trade clause. I don't know what the depth of the St. Louis Blues goaltending is in a longer term scenario. Right. But if you're willing to listen on your captain, Brayden Schenn, which we know Armstrong has been doing, there are teams out there that could use that quality of playoff goaltending that we saw in the championship final from Jordan Binnington.
I know Doug a little bit. He's not scared. He's bold. He's aggressive. In the place St. Louis is in, everything has to be discussed.
Yeah.
And Army will do that. And I hadn't even began to think of that because
me neither, but it makes sense, doesn't it? Like,
sure.
Why wouldn't you? This guy's just played maybe one of the games of his life. I mean, he can gauge that.
Okay,
as
but
the goalie
I will say as a like a wannabe general manager, like we all are. This is like, you got to be careful. You hear it all the time from teams. Oh yeah, this guy he's a 40 goal scorer and he got 40 goals once. He's not a 40 goal scorer. Jordan Binnington's save percentage is 890 something or other.
Right.
Don't be seduced by one game. If you're
Yeah,
another
but you
team,
got the Stanley Cup resume too, right? I
yeah,
mean, I know
that's 5 years. That's 5 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
So my 6 years ago. So my point is, like, you just cannot let yourself get dragged into that's the norm, as opposed to that was an exceptional standout game, right? Because everybody has them. Binnington had his when everybody was watching. He took
Yeah.
all of the pressure and he munched it up, and he said, F it. And he was amazing. But I don't know, like, it's easy to sit here. I don't need a goalie. I need to get to the airport on time. That's all I got to worry about, right? Like,
See, here I thought we were going to make headlines, and I thought you were going, hey, if I'm Stan Bowman, I'm calling him today. I mean,
well, sure, why not? Or
Yeah.
if you're Army, like, why not? If Edmonton is an interesting place, because if you don't have faith that there's one more gear to Stuart Skinner,
yeah,
then of course you have to look at it. But you're not bringing Binnington in to play with Skinner. What are you doing with that?
right. Yeah.
It's like, so if we're trying to link, well, you were trying to link those two teams. So that like, there's no way that they coexist. Not that they can't, but what are you doing on a team that has other needs as well? Like, you got to use your
Right.
cap space the best you can. So interesting, you pulled that one right out there. I like it, Dregs. I like it.
That's outstanding. All right, we're going to let you go because clearly by the wallpaper, you're still in Boston and you've got to get to Pittsburgh for that afternoon game tomorrow. 14 games on the menu as the NHL resumes on Saturday. So, man, you're getting right back into it in a big way. What are you most looking forward to now as the regular season comes back online? Is it the obvious? Is it the playoff races as we close in on the trade deadline?
Well, I think with so many teams kind of all clustered around the edges of it, for sure, that I think it's going to take a week for everybody to kind of like churn back to the regular season. But as you mentioned, Drakes, there's only 2 weeks to the deadline.
Yeah.
Right? So churn back however you want. Like, things are happening here and they'll happen quickly. Mm-hmm. And this will become, the Four Nations will become a great memory, a great spectacle for the sport. And then it's plow ahead into the next thing. Mm-hmm. So this week will be interesting because the table will be set in a lot of places in the next few days. And then whatever the execution is over the last 10 days, that's the thing I'm most looking at. And then, come March 8th, it's the final sprint to the deadline, or final sprint to the end of the year. It's quick, man. It's quick.
All right. Those are your headlines. Thank you to Tim Hortons. And again, you're diving right back into the National Hockey League regular season schedule and our schedule here on Ray and Regs. I mean, it's been regular. I mean, it's been routine. We've done the Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday thing, but it feels like next week it'll get back to what we're more accustomed to, right? We'll be talking about the playoffs as we just have here briefly. Ryan Rashog will come back online. We'll do more Ask Ray and Dregs. Maybe we'll throw a guest into the mix.
I got 3 games. I got 3 games next week too. So other than that, that'll be just an easy week.
Good deal. All right. Well, this is short and sweet. Just wanted to, as we let you go, just put that bow on it, as I suggested earlier. Your biggest takeaway of the Four Nations face-off as we leave it in the rearview mirror.
Sometimes there is things that you overestimate. Sometimes you get caught by surprise, and the old phrase "lightning in a bottle." That's what this tournament was. I don't think anybody had the expectation that it was going to be this fantastic. And I just loved being a part of it, like to do it from the games I did, from the place I get to do it. I just was blown away by the commitment and the skill and the want and the desire of the players. And I'll finish it with this. The respect that the coaches showed at the end of the game for each other. They came
So
out
cool.
and they were talking right in front of me, and I could hear them. And I'm like, man, these guys all felt really fortunate to be part of this. And I'm like, that to me is like, we talk about growing the game and greater good of the game. This tournament was more than a game in Europe in the preseason or anything like that. This stuff grows the game, and we were lucky to watch it.
Well, that's why you are the best, my friend. And you know what your reward for all the work that you put into the Four Nations face-off is going to be? Alex Ovechkin is going to get 5 tomorrow afternoon.
5. Ooh, that would be quite a strike. That would be well. At least I know what we're going to talk about.
You're set. All right, buddy. Safe travels.
Talk to you later. Thanks, Dregs. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.
You bet. And thank you to our sponsors who continue to support Ray and Dregs and make this podcast possible. Our title sponsor, Tim Hortons. And thank you to our buddies at Acon. Until next time, stay safe, everybody.